I dialed the number with a sense of excitement and curiosity, hoping to hear about the day my daughter Sophie had been planning for months. The sound of the phone ringing echoed through the silence of my home, and when Sophie finally picked up, I could almost feel the joy and anticipation in her voice. But what she said next shattered my heart. "Oh, we got married yesterday, Mom. We just invited the special people. You're not one of them." Her words hit me like a slap across the face, cold and final. I stood there stunned, unable to speak for a moment, my hand still gripping the phone like it might slip through my fingers. How could this be? I had spent years supporting her emotionally and financially, always the one to provide for her every need. I had given everything to her, to us, and now it felt as though I had been erased from the most important day of her life. A day I thought would finally bring us closer. Instead, I was cast aside like some distant relative she barely knew. I was crushed. My name is Martha. I'm 65 years old, and I used to run a successful marketing company until I retired a few years ago. Now I live alone in a house my late husband and I built together, a house that was once filled with laughter and love, but now echoes with silence. I have one daughter, Sophie, who's 30, and her husband, Aaron. Sophie works as the director of marketing for a multinational corporation, a career that has taken her far. Aaron, on the other hand, is an aspiring artist trying to find his place in the world. They've had their struggles, of course, but I've always been there to help them. I provided for them financially when they needed it, gave them a home when they didn't have one, and supported them through every challenge. But that phone call, it was like a wake-up call that I didn't want to hear. I had been there for Sophie through everything, or so I thought. I raised her as a single mother after her father passed, pouring every ounce of my energy into giving her the life I never had. I was proud of the woman she had become, proud of the life we had built together. Yet now I was forced to confront the harsh reality that I had been nothing more than a bank account in their eyes. I wasn't a mother. I wasn't even family. I was just someone they turned to when they needed something. The pain in my chest was suffocating, and for the first time I realized that I had been living in a cycle of silence, always giving, always sacrificing, but never being truly seen. It wasn't just about the money. It was about love, respect, and my place in their lives. I had been invisible to them, and that realization hit me harder than any financial loss ever could. As I hung up the phone, the weight of everything I had been through crashed down on me. This was not just about a wedding. This was about the years I had spent trying to prove my worth to my own daughter, only to be rejected at the most pivotal moment. I felt like I had failed. I had invested so much of myself into them, and in return, they had given me nothing but emptiness. But deep down, something inside me snapped. I realized that if I didn't start protecting myself, no one else would. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: I would never be this vulnerable again. I walked to the kitchen, my hands trembling as I made a cup of tea. My mind raced as I tried to sort through the emotions swirling inside me. I couldn't let this define me. I had to take control for once and stop giving in to their demands. The silence in the house felt different now, heavy but also liberating. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about me. I was thinking about the life I had put on hold for so long, the dreams I had set aside to be there for them. And now I realized I had to start living for myself. It was time to stop pretending that my love could be bought with money. The days after that phone call felt like a fog. The reality of being excluded from Sophie's wedding still hung over me, but something else, something more powerful, began to take root inside. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about a missed wedding. It was about something deeper, something I had refused to see for far too long. Sophie hadn't just excluded me from her wedding, she had excluded me from her life. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I was nothing more than a source of money to her and Aaron. It wasn't always this way, of course. I had been the one to support Sophie when she was struggling after college. I had been the one who helped her get on her feet when she didn't have a place to stay. And yes, I had been the one who paid for things I shouldn't have, things that went beyond what any mother should feel obligated to provide. But it felt right at the time. I wanted to help her. I wanted to feel needed. It was my way of showing her that I loved her, that I was always there for her. But now I could see the pattern clearly. Sophie and Aaron were living in a dingy apartment, barely able to make ends meet, always scrambling for money, And yet every few months, Sophie would call, her voice sweet and soft-laden with just the right amount of urgency, asking for money. At first, it felt normal. I was her mother and I wanted to help, but it soon became a routine. I'd write the check, send the money, and think nothing of it. They were always in financial trouble, it seemed. Rent overdue, car payments behind, bills piling up. It was never ending. And I, in my foolishness, thought it was my duty to step in. I didn't question it. I didn't ask how they got themselves into these messes or why they couldn't figure it out on their own. I just gave. I gave and gave because that's what mothers do, right? But it was becoming harder to ignore the truth. I realized that every time I visited them, it wasn't the warm embrace I had imagined in my mind. Sophie was always polite but distant. When I asked about her day, she would give a quick answer, then change the subject. Aaron would rarely even look me in the eye. His complaints about their financial struggles never ended, but he never seemed to be doing much to change their situation. The house they were living in, the one I had helped them get, was falling apart. Yet no amount of money seemed to be enough. They always needed more. It felt like a trap, one I had unwittingly walked into. What bothered me most, though, was the emptiness. Sophie didn't want my company, my advice, or my love. She just wanted my money. It hit me harder than I cared to admit, but the truth was undeniable. I wasn't a mother to her anymore. I was a walking ATM. I couldn't help but wonder, what was I doing? How had I gotten here, constantly sacrificing my time, my energy, my hard-earned savings, just to be used like this? Each time I visited, I was more of a stranger, more of an inconvenience than a loved one. And each time I handed over the money, I felt a little more hollow inside, a little more invisible. The moment I realized the truth, that they were using me, I knew I had to stop. But how? How do you stop being the person you've always been? The one who's always there? The one who's always giving? How do you protect yourself from the ones you love the most? That day, sitting in my kitchen with a cup of tea in hand, I made a decision. No more. No more money, no more silence. I would no longer be their fallback. I had given enough. It was time to protect what was mine, what little I had left of myself. It was time to stop being invisible. For the first time in years, I felt like I was waking up from a long, painful dream, and I wasn't going to let anyone drag me back into it. It wasn't until I sat down one quiet evening, the weight of everything I'd given to Sophie and Aaron finally sinking in, that the full scope of my actions hit me. Over the past 3 years, I had sent them more than $50,000 money. I had worked hard for money that was meant for my own future, for the comfort I had earned in my retirement. And yet, I had given it away. Without question, without hesitation, I handed it over, thinking I was doing the right thing. But in doing so, I had lost something far more precious than any dollar amount. I sat there in the dim light of my living room, the weight of the decision sinking into my chest. The number seemed unreal at first, but when I started writing it down, adding up the rent payments, the car loans, the groceries, the bills, it was all there, laid out in front of me, a painful reminder of just how much I had sacrificed. I felt sick to my stomach. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let them use me like that for so long? The realization was a sharp sting, but it was also the awakening I needed. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could change how I moved forward. I could stop giving. I could stop pretending that this was just a phase, a temporary hardship for them. I had spent so many years giving without question, without ever asking if they truly valued me, if they saw me for who I was, not just as a provider. And now with that realization came a choice, one I had avoided for far too long. The decision was not easy, and it didn't come all at once. But over the next few days, I began to change the way I saw myself. I started focusing on things I had neglected for years, things I loved but had buried beneath my endless responsibilities. One of those things was art. I had always wanted to paint. I used to dabble in it when I was younger, but as life got busier, the paintbrushes and canvases were pushed to the back of my closet, forgotten, in favor of more important things. But now, in this quiet moment of reflection, I knew I needed to find myself again. I enrolled in an art class at the local community center. The first day I walked in, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. I hadn't picked up a paintbrush in years, and the thought of starting again was daunting. But when I dipped my brush into the paint for the first time, it felt like coming home. There was something liberating about the process, no deadlines, no expectations, just the simple act of creating something for myself, something that wasn't tied to anyone else's needs or wants. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't doing something for them. I was doing it for me. Then came the phone call. Sophie. Again. Asking for more money. The usual soft pleading tone was there, but something in me had shifted. I didn't even flinch as I listened to her request. My heart didn't race, my mind didn't immediately start calculating how much I could afford to send. Instead, I felt calm, steady. And when I spoke, my voice was clear. "I can't help you this time, Sophie," I said, surprised at how firm I sounded. "I've given enough." There was silence on the other end. I could hear her fumbling for words, perhaps trying to come up with the right thing to say to make me change my mind. But I wasn't going to budge. I was done being her backup. Done being the one who was always there to bail them out. The feeling of relief that washed over me was nothing short of overwhelming. I realized in that moment that I had been living for everyone but myself. But now I was living for me. I was finally making decisions that weren't about pleasing others or fulfilling some unspoken obligation. And in that small, quiet victory, I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for years. I wasn't just a mother, a provider, or a caretaker anymore. I was Martha, a woman who had finally found the strength to live for herself. The decision to stand my ground felt like a quiet revolution. Sophie's call had been the first test, and I had passed. But I knew it wouldn't end there. The silence I had created by cutting off their financial support was deafening, and I could feel it in my bones that Sophie and Aaron wouldn't let this go easily. They didn't see me as a person, they saw me as a resource. And when that resource dried up, they would do whatever it took to reopen the taps. It wasn't long before Sophie showed up at my doorstep, the familiar knock on the door sending a ripple of tension through me. I had already made up my mind that I wouldn't be intimidated, but when I opened the door, I couldn't help but feel a pang of something, a mixture of guilt, pity, and the faintest hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different between us. She stood there, her face a mask of concern, her voice coated with that sugary sweetness I knew all too well. "Mom, I'm so sorry." Sophie began, her eyes wide with what seemed like genuine emotion. "I know you've been struggling, and I hate that we've been so distant, but we really need your help right now. Aaron and I are in a tough spot, and we can't make it without you." I swallowed hard. There it was, the familiar pull of guilt. She was so good at it, this act of being the daughter who needed her mother. But something in me remained steadfast. I wasn't going to fall for it this time. Not again. "I've already given enough, Sophie," I said, my voice firm, even though it felt like I was breaking a part of myself off with each word. "You've asked for too much, and I've done more than enough for you and Aaron." The silence that followed felt heavy. Sophie stood there frozen for a moment as if she couldn't believe I was saying no. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was calculating, trying to figure out what else to say to sway me. But I was done. "Mom, I don't understand," she said, her voice thickening with a mixture of confusion and frustration. "Why are you doing this? We've always been a family. You know we're struggling, and you're just going to turn your back on us." I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. It was so easy for her to turn it into something about me not being there for her. But that was the thing, wasn't it? It was always about them, their needs, their struggles. Never about me. Never about how much I had given or how little I had in return. It hit me like a wave, this realization that I had been so wrapped up in their lives, in their demands, that I had forgotten to live my own. Aaron said something similar. I replied, my voice growing steadier. He told me I'm abandoning my family. Well, maybe it's time to stop being used, Sophie. Maybe it's time I take care of myself for once. The words were out before I could stop them, and for the first time I saw Sophie falter. Her mask cracked just for a moment, and I saw the truth behind it all, the manipulation, the entitlement. This wasn't about family. This was about control. They wanted me to feel guilty, to feel like I owed them, but I didn't owe them anything anymore. "Mom, please," Sophie said softly, her voice now a little quieter, as if trying a new tactic. "We need you. I need you." I shook my head. "No, Sophie. You need money, and I've given you enough. You've made it clear that my love doesn't matter unless it comes with a check. I won't be a part of that anymore." Sophie's face crumpled, and for a moment I thought she might cry, but I didn't feel the usual pull to comfort her. I didn't feel the need to soften my words. The twist was already there, the realization that I had the power to say no, that I could break the cycle. And it was liberating. "I'm sorry, Sophie, but I've made my decision," I said, my voice calm, "and I won't be changing it." Just as she opened her mouth to respond, the doorbell rang. It was Aaron standing behind her, looking as if he had just come from a boardroom, his expression cold, calculating. I could see the frustration in his eyes, but more than that, I saw the desperation. He tried to step in, his words sharp, trying to play on my emotions. "Martha, you can't do this. You're not thinking clearly. We're your family. You can't just turn your back on us like this." But I was done being pushed around. I had already made up my mind, and nothing was going to change that. "I've already made the decision, Aaron," I said, my voice firm, "and I'm not changing it. Now I suggest you leave." For the first time in years, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't their ATM anymore. I wasn't going to be their emotional punching bag. The silence that followed was deafening, but it was mine. It was the sound of my newfound freedom. I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there in the hallway, stunned, defeated. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't look back. After Aaron and Sophie left that day, standing there in the hallway still as stone, I felt the quiet weight of their defeat hanging in the air. It wasn't just a silence between us. It was a silence I had created. It was the sound of me finally reclaiming my life. I had said no, and for the first time in years, I felt a sliver of peace. But peace was fleeting. I knew they wouldn't just walk away quietly. Sophie's emotional pull was never just about love. It had always been about control, about what I could give them. And as much as I wanted to believe I could go on, I knew this was far from over. I had made my decision, but now I needed to protect myself legally, financially, emotionally. I needed to make sure I had everything in place to prevent them from using my vulnerability against me. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about standing up for myself, about proving that I wasn't just some confused, helpless old woman. That's when I called Dr. Emily. I had known her for years, having met her through a local support group for people adjusting to retirement. Dr. Emily was a no-nonsense kind of woman, sharp and direct. I needed someone like her now, someone who would see me for who I truly was. Not just as a widow, not just as a mother, but as a person, with a right to live on my own terms. She listened to me without interrupting as I explained the situation, the years of financial support, the emotional manipulation, the constant feeling of being taken advantage of. She nodded as I spoke, her eyes softening with understanding, but she didn't hold back any sympathy. That wasn't what I needed. What I needed was validation. "I'm going to run a few tests," Dr. Emily said, her voice steady, professional. "But I have no doubt that you're of sound mind. If anything, you're more self-aware than most people half your age." I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but also a strange kind of resolve. I wasn't going to let anyone, especially my own family, define my capabilities. I wasn't going to let them strip me of my dignity just because they thought I was getting older, just because they thought they could push me aside. The next few weeks were filled with appointments, paperwork, and a lot of reflection. Dr. Emily confirmed what I already knew. I was mentally sharp, capable of making my own decisions, and very much in control of my financial situation. I had been afraid at first that perhaps I was just fooling myself, that maybe the constant pressure of my family had clouded my judgment. But now I knew for certain. I had every right to protect my assets, to choose how I spent my money, and to refuse to give them another dime. But I wasn't done yet. I needed to collect proof. Evidence of everything I had done for Sophie and Aaron, every penny spent, every promise made every time they asked for more. I started a notebook, a journal of conversations, and a ledger of money transferred. It felt almost ridiculous, like I was keeping tabs on my own children, but I knew it was necessary. They would try to manipulate the situation. They would try to twist the facts to make it seem like I was irrational, like I had lost my grip on reality. I started writing down the conversations, the little lies they'd told me, the times they tried to make me feel guilty or inadequate. The receipts piled up: gas station receipts, rent checks, credit card bills. And in that process, something else began to shift inside me. The anger I had felt at first, raw and fiery, began to cool into something else: clarity. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being unreasonable. I was simply standing up for myself for the first time in a long time. As I sat there filling out another receipt, I realized how much time I had wasted, how much of myself I had given away without ever asking for anything in return. But that was over now. The person I had been, the woman who had bent over backward for a family that only took, was gone. The new Martha was someone who would fight for herself, someone who wouldn't be silenced, someone who knew she deserved better, and I was ready. It wasn't long before I was staring down the reality of the situation. Sophie and Aaron were taking this fight to court. They had filed a petition claiming that I was no longer mentally competent to manage my finances, accusing me of being incapable of making sound decisions. They tried to frame it as an act of concern, but I could see through it. This was no longer about my well-being, it was about taking control of what I had worked so hard for. The news hit me like a cold slap. I knew they wouldn't let it go so easily, but I didn't expect them to go this far. They were attempting to declare me mentally unfit, to strip away my rights, all in the name of helping me. Sophie had always been good at playing the victim, and now Aaron had joined her, both of them turning to the courts to make their case. They had a lawyer, a smooth, silver-tongued man who seemed to know just how to manipulate the facts in their favor. As I sat in the small courtroom, the weight of the situation settled in. Sophie was sitting across from me, her face the picture of concern, but I saw the truth behind her eyes. This wasn't about me, it was about what they stood to gain. Aaron, sitting beside her, barely glanced at me. His eyes were cold, calculating, always looking for a way to gain the upper hand. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not this time. David, my lawyer, had been preparing for this moment for weeks. He was a friend of my late husband's, someone I trusted deeply, and he had a sharp mind. When he stood up in court to represent me, his voice was calm, but firm, and I could feel his confidence settle around me like a shield. Your Honor, David began, his voice clear, cutting through the tension in the room. What my clients are trying to do is based on nothing more than assumption and manipulation. My client, Mrs. Martha Richards, is of sound mind. She's made decisions for her life, for her finances, for her future, all of which she has the full right to do. Just because she's chosen to stop financially supporting her grown daughter and son-in-law does not mean she's lost her ability to think clearly. In fact, it shows she's thinking quite rationally. I felt a rush of relief wash over me as David spoke. He was saying everything I had wanted to say but hadn't found the words for. The truth was being laid out clear and precise. This wasn't about my mental state, it was about greed. They weren't concerned about me, they were concerned about losing their access to my money. David went on, presenting evidence of the financial support I had provided to Sophie and Aaron over the years: receipts, bank transfers, letters. Each piece of evidence told the same story. I had been more than generous, even to the point of sacrificing my own savings. Sophie's lawyer tried to counter, claiming that my refusal to continue supporting them was evidence of mental decline, but David wasn't having any of it. He systematically tore apart their arguments, showing that I was fully capable of understanding the consequences of my decisions. Just because she's chosen to stop enabling her adult children does not mean she's incapable of managing her finances. David continued, his voice steady. In fact, the evidence here shows that she's being far more prudent with her money than her family ever gave her credit for. This is not a case of mental incompetence, it's a case of financial exploitation. As I sat there listening to the words I had been too afraid to say out loud, I felt a surge of something new strength. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control. Sophie's face twisted with frustration, her carefully crafted mask slipping for just a moment. Aaron's jaw clenched as David continued to lay bare the truth. The tide was turning. I could feel it in the air, and the way Sophie's attempts to manipulate the court were starting to fall apart. With every word David spoke, the pieces clicked into place. The court began to lean in my favor, and I knew deep down that this was my moment. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was my fight for my life, for my dignity, for my right to decide what happens to me and my money. And as David spoke, I realized that I was no longer afraid. They had underestimated me. They thought I was just an old woman, a vulnerable target, but I was more than that. I had fought for everything in my life, and I wasn't about to let them take it from me now. The court session ended with a brief recess, but the damage had been done. David's defense had landed its blows, and I could see the doubt creeping into the minds of the judge and even Sophie's lawyer. It wasn't over yet, but I had taken the first step toward winning back my freedom. For the first time in months, I let myself smile. It was small, but it was real. The days following the court session were a blur, but as I walked out of that courtroom, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: relief. It was the kind of relief that washes over you like a cleansing rain, erasing all the tension, the fear, the doubts that had built up over time. I had won. I had proven my competency, my right to decide my own life, and most importantly, I had taken control of the narrative once again. The legal battle wasn't over yet, but I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. Sophie and Aaron hadn't counted on me fighting back so hard. They thought I'd just roll over, hand over everything I had worked for, and let them walk all over me. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I couldn't help but smile to myself as I thought about the months of pressure, of self-doubt, of being pushed to the brink. All of it had led me here to a place where I knew who I was, where I knew what I wanted, and where I had the strength to fight for it. The court may have been a battle, but what I had won was more than just money. It was my freedom, my independence, my self-worth. In the weeks that followed, I made a decision. The house. The house that had once been a symbol of my life with my husband, the place where I had raised Sophie, the home that had once echoed with laughter now felt like a cage. It was too big for me, too full of memories that I didn't want to carry anymore. It was time to let go. I sold the house. It wasn't easy, not at first. The thought of packing up everything, of leaving behind the life I had known for so many years was daunting. But it was also freeing. I felt lighter, more at peace. The house had been a prison of my own making, full of expectations, full of people who had only wanted what they could take from me. I found a small apartment, cozy and just right for me. I no longer needed the sprawling space or the grand furniture. All I needed now was room to breathe, room to live for myself. I moved in, unpacked my things, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at home. I had space now, physical space, mental space. And I filled that space with something I had neglected for too long: my art. I had always loved to paint, to create, but for years I had pushed that passion aside, thinking it wasn't important enough. But now, it was the center of my life. I joined local art classes, attended workshops, and found a community of people who shared my love for creativity. These new friends, they saw me, not the mother, not the provider, but me. Each stroke of the paintbrush, each new canvas was a reminder that I was still capable of creating, still capable of being more than just a caretaker or a financial support system. I was an artist, a woman with dreams, with desires, with a future ahead of me. I didn't have to live up to anyone's expectations anymore. I didn't have to bend myself to fit their needs. I was free. As I stood on my little balcony one evening looking out at the city below, I realized how far I had come. I had fought for myself. I had claimed my independence. And in doing so, I had found a new version of myself, one that was stronger, more self-assured, and more in control than ever before. The years of being used, of being taken for granted, were over. And now, with every passing day, I was building the life I had always deserved. Not for them, not for anyone else, but for me. I had won, and it felt like I had finally found peace. As the months passed, I began to realize that my new life wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. After selling the house and moving into my small apartment, I found that the space I had created wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. I had finally cut the ties that had bound me for so long, and in doing so, I was free to live as I had always wanted to. No more playing the role of the long-suffering mother or the provider. For the first time, I was simply Martha, just Martha. One evening, after yet another solitary yet peaceful painting session, I decided to attend a local art exhibition. It was an event I had hesitated to go to, afraid that I would still feel like an outsider, unsure of whether I belonged in a world so far removed from the life I had left behind. But something inside me had shifted. I was no longer looking for permission or approval. I was finally living my own life, and I was determined to enjoy it. It was at this exhibition that I met Grace. She was standing near one of my paintings, her gaze fixed on the swirling blue and green colors. I was nervous at first, but she turned to me with a warm smile that immediately put me at ease. "Your work is beautiful," she said, her voice calm and kind. "It's so full of life, so full of energy." We began talking, and I soon learned that Grace had her own past full of struggles, an abusive marriage that had left her questioning her worth, years spent buried in the lives of others, just as I had. But unlike me, Grace hadn't yet found the strength to break free. She had been stuck like I had once been in a life that wasn't hers. As we continued to meet and talk over the following weeks, I began to realize how much I had in common with her. Grace was learning to rebuild herself just as I was. We began to share stories, both painful and triumphant, about the lessons we had learned about self-love and taking care of ourselves. She spoke of her own transformation, the steps she had taken to rediscover who she truly was, without the weight of others' expectations. In many ways, she was where I had been, just beginning to understand the power of saying no, the importance of choosing yourself first. We spent hours in galleries over cups of coffee and in the quiet corners of the park, speaking about the things we had endured, the things we had learned. And with every conversation, I felt myself growing stronger, more confident in my ability to live on my own terms. Grace was becoming a part of my new world, and with her by my side, I felt less alone in this new chapter of my life. With her encouragement, I began to organize my own art exhibitions. The first one was small, but it felt monumental. My paintings, my creations were finally being seen by others, not as a mother's sacrifice or as something to fill the empty spaces of my life, but as a true reflection of who I was. I also started traveling. The places I had once dreamed of seeing, Paris, Rome, the countryside of Ireland, became real. Every trip felt like a gift I had given to myself, and every moment I spent in new cities surrounded by new experiences, I felt a deeper connection to myself. No longer was I waiting for someone to take me there. I had learned to take myself, and it felt glorious. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my soul. I had found my place, not in the roles I had played for others, but in the world I had created for myself. I was no longer living in the shadow of what others wanted from me. I was finally living for me. As I sat at a small cafe in Paris, sipping my coffee and gazing at the Eiffel Tower, I couldn't help but smile. I had made it. I had fought for my freedom, for my right to live without guilt, without sacrifice. And here I was in the heart of the world I had once only dreamed of. It wasn't just about the places I visited or the art I created. It was about something deeper. It was about reclaiming my power, my joy, my life. And with Grace by my side, I knew this was only the beginning. The life I had always dreamed of was unfolding before me, and I was finally the one holding the brush. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the story. Share your feelings in the comments below and let us know where you're watching from. If you found this video meaningful, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join the Everyday Family Conflicts community. Stay with us for more real stories and discussions that connect us all. We look forward to hearing from you.